So if you spent any amount of time in the gym training to get bigger or stronger, there's no doubt that deadlifting has become a staple in your routine. The deadlift has replaced the bench press as lifting culture's favorite lift, partly because it's a nasty developmental exercise, gives a lot of bang for the buck and the time invested, but also because it is featured as a staple in strength sports that have become wildly popular. But like everything that gets captured by popular culture, sometimes we lose the plot, and that is why I am here. New trainees who are super excited to get in and get their gains will oftentimes spend that precious gym time that should be spent training, testing. Training and testing are two different things. You shouldn't be going in just constantly trying to bash your head against the same weight over and over. Now, oddly enough, for as hard as lifters will go in the paint on their favorite lifts like a deadlift, many of them will start to panic and find a reason to do anything else once they get prescribed anything that is not their favorite lift. I have trained people that were world-class deadlifters that had a panic attack when I tried to make them put a 45-pound plate on the leg press. So we're going to cover the accessory work, the supplementary work that is vital to building a big pull. These are some of the best tools you can have in your arsenal, but without fail, when I put these into programs, I see lifters underperform. I see them not take it seriously. I see them sandbag it. And it's usually because of one of two things. One, they don't have respect for the exercise, meaning they think it's a lame movement or they don't think it's going to be effective or it's not worth their time. So they'll skip it at the end of the workout. Or two, because it's really hard and uncomfortable. And that's most of the reason that people don't push these movements. So let's get into the 3 movements that you're not training hard enough, what they have to offer you, and why you're not doing them. So the first one's going to be a Romanian deadlift. I have written about this, talked about this at length. It's one of my favorite staple movements. It's probably one of only a few things that I can really credit to my shitty deadlift getting turned around. It has a huge developmental capacity. It is very easy to recover from. It ingrains good movement patterns. You can do it for a wide variety of reps, and there's a 1-to-1 correlation. As your RDL gets better, so will your deadlift. And no matter what your deadlift weakness is, I can find a way to justify using an RDL to fix it. I'm also going to put good mornings in this category because they're very similar movement types. They both use reduced loads. The movement pattern's very similar. It's just one has the weight on your shoulders, one has it in your hands. And they're both much easier to recover from than just pulling from the floor. So they do a lot of the same things. And people are really inclined to sandbag both of them. I would say good mornings more so than RDLs. Now, if you break down how strong a lifter is and what they should be using, most people just fall way, way short of the weights they should be using. I have 500-pound deadlifters who stay with 135 on their RDLs. I don't know if they're treating it like a finesse movement, like a concentration curl, like they're really trying to get that mind-muscle connection, or if they just really don't like being uncomfortable by being strapped to a weight for the 30 seconds it takes to do a set of 12 under control. A 600-pound deadlifter should be using at least 400 pounds for sets of 6 or 8 reps. If you figure 60% of your max should be something you could do 15 to 20 times in one all-out killer set, there's no reason you can't do that for 5 to 8 reps in an RDL. And if you can't, that means there's a hole you have to work on. Now, the nature of an RDL, being controlled, being braced, keeping a nice flat torso, and maintaining that the entire movement without bowing, without giving, without resting the bar on the ground, that disadvantages you in a very specific way. That's why it's such a good developmental workout. It's more time spent having to maintain posture, which is exactly how we make those muscles stronger. It's also going to train the main movers at each different phase of the lift, where usually you're in a more optimal setup. Usually there's more momentum on the bar. And when you take that momentum away and you're moving under control in a deliberate fashion, that is how you make yourself stronger at every single inch of the movement. So it targets both the main movers. It targets every phase of the lift. It makes you better at changing direction. It makes you better at breaking the weight off the floor. It makes you better about the mid shin and at the spot right around the knee, which is where a lot of people get sticky. It hits the hammies and glutes heavily, especially when you start working the range and stretching at the bottom. And it is just a huge asset to your ability to lock out and to maintain position. It's just such a good movement. For good mornings, the only difference I would recommend is not getting super deep with good mornings because of the bar placement. When you really start to fixate on depth, then it becomes this obsession over standards and you end up sacrificing weight because you're trying to get lower and lower. If you stop about at the position you would be at like an 18-inch deadlift, if you think of a rack pull where the bar is just below your kneecap, imagine what your setup is there. That's about the position you want to be in for a good morning. I think at the bottom of a good morning, if I were to hang my hands, would my hands be below my kneecap? That's plenty deep enough. And that allows you to handle more load, so the trade-off is there. Again, good mornings, great for the upper back, especially with specialty bars. You can absolutely use straight bars. Just having a straight bar isn't a good enough excuse not to do them at all. But it will be more comfortable with a safety squat bar or a cambered bar. I prefer cambered bars because the weight stays back, so it puts it in your hips more, which is more of what I'm looking to get out of it. If you have huge upper back weaknesses, if you have trouble maintaining position or stabilizing, a safety bar shifts the weight forward, so those muscles have to fight, which over time will grow and thicken those stabilizers and make you a more efficient puller that way. But if you're wondering how much weight you should be using in something like an RDL, take your max deadlift, take 60% of that, ask yourself if you could do 10 clean, deep reps of a Romanian deadlift without the weight touching the ground, without your back giving. If you can't meet that standard, that means that you have work to do. Start somewhere at 35 or 40%. Make sure you're committing to repeating sets at 10 and 12. Let yourself get good at that range before you start doing them really heavy. They are great as strength movements as well. I've gone down to 5s, 4s, even 3s on RDLs at a strength block as I was getting ready for a meet, as I was getting ready for a really big pull. But you want to be able to work into those. It takes time to get comfortable. So don't just try to jump into the heavy weight. You have to earn that, build the volume base, just like everything else. But once you start to push these movements, your deadlift's going to absolutely explode. The next one is machine isolation work. This is kind of a big nebulous category, but I'm gonna break it down a little bit. We're basically talking about hamstring and glute work, to a lesser extent your low back. So your posterior chain, we're talking about the accessory movements you do to specifically get those muscles stronger. So there's two things we worry about. Flexing at the knee, you're looking at something like a lying hamstring curl, or a glute ham raise, which does the same thing, just in the opposite direction. Your leg is anchored and your body is moving as opposed to the other way around. And we're worried about the hip extension, which is something like a back extension, or the opposite of that is a reverse hyper, where your body's fixed and you're moving your legs instead of the other way around. Again, high recoverability, very easy to recover from. They're great for accruing volume. You can do a lot of work, a lot of really intense, high effort work that is great for building mass, without the huge systemic hit that you would get by doing a ton of deadlift volume. So you can sneak them in. It's easy to do at the end of a workout. It's easy to do before a workout. You can do them on off days. You can do them on GPP days. You can do them on a second deadlift day. You really can't fit in enough hamstring and glute work using these methods. It's really just a matter of, are you giving yourself time to ramp up and acclimate to it? There's a huge reward, very little risk. So they're great movements for that. And people don't hit these hard, mainly because they don't take them seriously. Sure, they're hard movements to do when you push them, but they're not as hard as some of the other things that lifters typically kill themselves doing. It really comes down to people looking at a hamstring curl or a back extension or a reverse hyper and not really being able to connect how vitally important that can be to building up your deadlift ability. It's only when you've been made to do so, either when you got shamed into it because it was part of what your training crew did or a coach made you do it, that you really see what the benefit is. Leg curls are one of my favorite exercises. Even when I am absolutely toast from a workout, I can always get on a leg curl machine and do 3 or 4 good quality sets. I can do them on off days and still recover. And the hamstrings tend to be a really big lagging area. They're hard to isolate with compound barbell movements. So something as simple as a leg curl is a good way to bring that up. You can do 2 leg, you can do single leg, you can do them for high reps. I like to start with sets of 10, 12, 15, and over time progress to sets of 6 and less. And I'll even go single leg so I can get closer and closer to really squeezing out every bit of strength from the muscle. I'm a big fan of reverse hypers. They're diametrically opposed to back extensions, so they're both hip extensions, but the reverse hyper does hit the erectors a little bit more in a way that not a lot of movements do. And for me, that turned out to be a game changer. I emphasize a lot of bracing. Bracing is extremely important, but yes, you still need a strong back. And it turned out that that part of my erectors was getting beaten up from deadlifting, but it wasn't really growing, and reverse hypers helped with that a lot. And then lastly, back extensions. Back extensions are just an easy, great movement. Again, heavy on the glutes and hamstrings, but you have to load them up. Just about everybody can do back extensions with body weight. You should not be settling for a couple sets of 10 with your body weight. If you can do 15 reps of a back extension without a problem, it's time to add weight. Hold a weight plate, hold multiple weight plates, use bands. I like using bands because it gets really heavy at the top and you can really feel your ass squeeze, really glute heavy. If you push the back extensions, especially holding at the top, you're going to get just nasty lockout power. And if you're inclined to start using it as a strength exercise, start stacking up those 45-pound plates, big upper back stimulus as well. It actually goes good as a supplementary exercise on upper back days if you're inclined to spread the workout throughout the week. The last one is a little unintuitive and people hate this movement, but I keep pushing it in because I'm adamant that this is just a vital component of a really big deadlift, and that is your rowing ability, specifically with free weights, with a barbell or with dumbbells. We know that the upper back is extremely important as a stabilizer. If the upper back is weak, the shoulders dump and a cascade effect happens where you lose everything, and then eventually you lose your ability to extend your hips. So you need a strong upper back to deadlift. They're one and the same, big back, big deadlift. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing cable variations or chest supported variations, but usually people cite wanting to save their back as the reason for choosing those movements. I think they do it because it's easier. I think people sandbag on bent rows and kroc rows because they are just harder, they're more uncomfortable. It's a bigger investment of emotion and psychology to get a lot out of those movements, even though there's more bang for the buck, even though one hard set of something like kroc rows goes way farther than a few sets of something like, cable rows or a hammer strength iso row. But remember, the best developmental exercises, the best deadlift supplementary exercise aren't just going to grow you in key areas, they're going to reinforce good habits. And free weight rowing movements force you to be bent over. They force those muscles that we ignore so much, the muscles of our abs, our obliques, our erectors, to be braced, to stay tight as we're doing this really aggressive rowing movement for the upper back. So everything above the waist gets hit in this huge fashion, but people by and large ignore it, they sandbag it, they don't take it seriously. I want you to think about this. If you are a good deadlifter, you should have a basic amount of conditioning. You should not fall apart every time you help somebody move, every time you bend over to pick up a quarter. You should have some resilience. And I think being able to do a basic back workout where you're bent over and rowing is part of that. The weights you're using are very light. As far as your low back is concerned, it's essentially GPP. If you're a 400-pound deadlifter, doing rows with 200 pounds is not going to kill you. And if it does, that means there's a hole in your conditioning, which means you should be doing it anyways. When my deadlift was at its absolute best, I was starting my deadlift workouts with bent rows. I was getting them out of the way first. It was a great warm-up for my deadlifts, so I was consolidating those stressors. At the time, my pull was in the mid-7s, and the heaviest I went on bent rows was 405 with a good amount of sway. If I was staying very strict, I'd be between 315 and 365. And I got a huge upper back stimulus, but I also got this immense bracing workout. I am huge on bracing. It's hugely important. But the thing is, if you're doing these exercises on a regular basis, you don't need to spend a lot of time throughout the week actually practicing your brace. Being bent over, maintaining a neutral position under a load for a long time, the best way to get your brace down. And if that's lacking in any capacity in your deadlift, this is going to be what fixes it. So for bent rows, I like to start with 12s and 15s, keep it really strict, stay very bent over, and have almost no sway. And then eventually as time goes on and I get heavier, I'll actually start to incorporate a bit of sway, use a little bit of slop in order to handle heavier loads. And there is huge transfer to my deadlift. I just feel so much more locked in, so much more secure. I know that my hips, my midsection are conditioned to the work that I'm trying to do. And my upper back just feels like it gets so much more purchase. I can really just aggressively launch into the weight. Kroc rows are also amazing. These are the most underutilized upper back exercise for no other reason than they're hard. You have to be a masochist like Kroc Lizeski was back in the day in order to get a lot out of these, but it is worth it. Straps, no straps, I don't care. I prefer to prioritize load. Going without straps will train your grip, but if that's not a main consideration, I would strap in, get the benefit of the load, get a good amount of heave, really focus on getting that elbow back. The motion, the time under tension, the high reps, 20, 30 reps plus per arm, that's going to be what gets you the training effect. And that's going to be what transfers over to that big pull that you're chasing. So those are the three things you are not training hard enough with regards to your deadlift. If you start to inject these into your training and over time as you condition, ramp up the effort, you're going to see these things move. And I promise you, you will look like a different thing. Your deadlift will improve, your physique will change. This will be the game changer in your training. So go seek these things out, take them seriously, bleed a little bit, leave your mark on the gym, make it so you have to army crawl out to your car. You got to earn it. So thanks so much for watching, guys. If you want to see how I put this stuff into action, go ahead and check out my Patreon. That's where I answer questions. That's where I update my training log on a daily basis with commentary. You get to see me die every week in my own training, my own pursuit for a big deadlift. And if you have any questions for me, that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.